Good morning, Garland Nixon here with Dr. Radhika Desai. Or is it Radhika? I always get whatever. Dr. Desai, you can look at the name and pronounce it as best you can. Whatever the case, we've got important stuff to talk about today. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Dr. Radhika Desai. So how do I pronounce your first name, Dr. Desai?
It's Radhika Desai is perfectly fine. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we're going to talk about tariffs and trade deals and sanctions. You know, what's interesting, Dr. Desai, let's get going in a few minutes. I'm going to show you all her website and let you know how you can find out more about Dr. Desai. But let's get going and let's get into it first. A couple of things. Number one, here's what's interesting. Donald Trump on his when he was on the campaign trail said, sanctions are destroying the dollar, sanctions are destroying everything, sanctions are bad, sanctions. And people listened to it and said, wow, that's interesting. That's true. Sanctions are bad for America. And he went on and he said the obvious about sanctions. Okay. So now he comes to power and he's running an empire, and they need an economic blunt object to hit people over the head. And he's already talked himself out of sanctions. And now we're going to use tariffs to make lots of money. Oh, wait a minute. We don't like what you're doing in Brazil with Bolsonaro. Set tariffs. We don't need. And now, so basically, he's replaced sanctions with tariffs. And it seems to me an imperial machination, because in order to beat people into submission, they got to have something. Anyway, your thoughts on, let's start here, the use of sanctions, tariffs, things of that nature, and its effect coming back home.
Well, I mean, you're quite right. Both sanctions and tariffs essentially destroy the liberal world order that the United States has striven to create for the last 80 odd years. So, in fact, even more than that, I would say, because, during the Great Depression, we are told that the United States heroically stepped forward, and Congress passed the RTAA, the Reciprocal Tariff Agreements Act, which allowed the president to reduce tariffs, because those days there were lots of tariffs because of the trade war of during the Great Depression of some countries against others. All countries against all countries, rather. And so the Congress passed this law, and we are always told that the United States took the lead in liberating trade and so on. In reality, of course, the reason why the United States needed to do that is because the United States, unlike the other major powers, did not have colonies. And therefore, there was no cushion to absorb the trade shock that came with the Great Depression and the protectionism that followed from that. So the United States had to take the lead in removing tariffs. But okay, so historically, the US in the 20th century has taken the lead in creating this liberal world order. And now it is destroying it. And sanctions were one way to destroy it, and tariffs are another. What is the difference between them? Sanctions basically have the whiff of punishment. It's like a judge pronouncing that you have done something wrong and we are going to punish you. Whereas tariffs seem to be about protecting oneself. And, the reason why I'm not even sure Trump understands the difference between these two things, but the reason why Trump goes on about tariffs is because tariffs raise revenue. And Trump has it in his head. If you look at a chart, and it's freely available on Wikipedia, if I had thought we would go there, I would have brought it up. But anyway, there's a chart on Wikipedia which shows that up until about the First World War, the bulk of the revenues of the federal government, and remember, the federal government was quite small at that time, but nevertheless, the bulk of the revenues of the federal government came from tariffs. The United States was among, even though the United States enjoys the natural protection of two oceans, it is an ocean away from practically anywhere else, it still imposed huge tariffs in order to industrialize and so on. So the federal government essentially raised revenues out of tariffs. And since then, of course, particularly with FDR's New Deal and then the post Second World War period of a relatively more benign welfare state, Keynesianism, blah, blah, and so on, you had the introduction of direct taxes, particularly income taxes and corporate taxes. And in Trump's fantasy, you should do away with this and replace them with tariffs. Now, there's a big problem with this, which is that I recently read that Howard Lutnick is celebrating how much money tariffs have already brought in to the United States. Tariffs have brought in some $100 billion in the first 6 months, and he thinks that by the end of the year we will be reaching some $300 billion. Okay, $300 billion, but the total revenues, and which are still short of the expenditure, but nevertheless, the total revenues of the federal government is $4.9 trillion per annum. So 4,900 versus 300. How are you going to replace all those taxes with tariffs? I mean, that's a complete dream. Anyway, so Trump likes tariffs for that reason, and Trump also likes tariff for another reason, which is, as we've probably said in the past when we've been discussing this, I think it's very important to understand that Trump is in the White House today because he got one thing right, which is that he knew that you can't win elections by telling Americans, ordinary American working people, that their economy is doing very well, because they know that it's not doing well. So then he tells them one truth, but of course, because he serves the same capitalist class as Biden does, then he must tell them at least some other untruth in order to allow him to continue serving that class. And so he tells them that their economic misery is because of trade, because of China, and of course, because of immigrants. So the two big things that he's done since taking office, one more zealously than the other, is he's of course been persecuting immigrants. Now, mind you, even there, he's had to pull his punches because, remember, he won the election by saying that he's going to deport 11 million immigrants. I mean, even at the present, even at that time when he was just elected and before Elon Musk took the axe to the American administration, the US did not have the administrative capacity to do this. So naturally, he has whittled it down, saying we are only going to deport criminals, although they're deporting all sorts of people. And what we see, I mean, I don't want to at all minimize the terror this inflicts on people who are, especially people who are non-white, people who may be African Americans, people who may be Hispanics, etc. Their lives have been made miserable. But nevertheless, what we see is a load of show raids that are taking place. Yes, a lot of deportations have taken place and so on, but still, compared to what he had promised, this is small, and it is performative. It's for show. It's and so on. And now we turn to tariffs. On tariffs, okay, so we got April the 2nd, Liberation Day, and all that grand performance on the White House lawn. And then, as soon as stock markets crashed, Trump reversed course. And since then, we've had this on again, off again tariff business, which, as you know, the Financial Times economist, the Financial Times reporter, Robert Armstrong, has coined the term TACO, Trump always chickens out. So essentially what everybody, and now we even have a TACO trade, like stock markets are going up, like they have shrugged off the fear of what tariffs will do to the world economy, to the American economy, etc., and they are going nowhere but up. There are also other reasons for that, but anyway, they are certainly shrugging off the tariff threat. So Trump wants to look like he's imposing tariffs. He's compelling all countries to give America a sweet deal that is going to improve the American economy, but he's come up with nothing concrete. I mean, if you look at the White House statement, which you sent me, Garland, on the EU deal, which was accomplished just 2 or 3 days ago on the weekend, it's all are indefinite. When you say that we have a trade deal, normally a trade deal is like this thick. It has loads of pages of commitments and specifications, and what counts as rice, and what counts as automobile parts and everything, and all of these detailed negotiations, which are usually the work of months of negotiations between dozens of negotiators on each side. And suddenly he has a 1 hour conversation with Ursula von der Leyen, and he comes up with this deal. And you see, it's all speculative. And already in the last 2 days since this commitment was made, a number of the headline grabbers of about that so-called deal are revealed to be nothing but empty promises, because Ursula von der Leyen has no way of delivering on them. Ursula von der Leyen has said we are going to buy, $750 billion worth of energy. I mean, first of all, this is way out of whack with what the EU is already buying, which they already know is overpriced energy. This would be multiplying that by 4 times. That's not going to happen. Secondly, the president of the European Commission, which is the position Ursula von der Leyen holds, has no capacity to compel European corporations to buy this energy or that energy. They will do what they will do. There is absolutely no way that she can do so. They have promised to buy arms. It's just a promise. It's not even written, as we say about some promises, it's not worth the paper it's written on. The thing about this deal is it's not even written on paper. It's just what the White House says it is. It's not signed by Ursula von der Leyen, even, let alone the heads of the 27 governments that constitute the EU, and so on. So there's that. There's another thing they said. What was it? Yes, the EU is going to invest like $500 billion into the United States. Like, seriously? Like, how can Ursula von der Leyen again compel EU corporations to invest? Similarly, the Japan deal was really absurd. Like, Latnik came out and said that the Japanese are going to invest some $500-600 billion in the United States, and they are going to make profits out of it and give 90% of the profits to the US government. And the Japanese said, "What are you talking about?"
Remember one of the, I got to throw, not to interrupt you. Isn't this what happened in the Middle East? When Trump went to the Middle East a couple months ago and came back and said they're going to put X amount of $1 trillion into the US and blah, blah, blah. And when you looked at the numbers, you're like, those countries would have to give us their entire wealth fund times like 3. And they're not going to, and they gave them an old beat up plane that they wanted to get rid of and sent them back.
That plane, yes, I had forgotten about that plane. But anyway, even if that plane is a shiny, bright new plane with a golden toilet for Trump in it, I don't think it's peanuts compared to what the Saudis can give, etc. But anyway, that's another matter altogether. Anyway, just to finish my points here. Basically, what Trump wants is every few days there has to be some big announcement in which he's made to look like he's winning stuff for America and for American workers. You see in that White House statement as well, it says, this is going to make life fantastic for American workers. Like, complete rubbish. So what he's doing is he's relying at least on the idea that people have short-term memory. But you know what? People's memories become longer when they suffer, and they continue suffering. And when they are expecting the suffering to be alleviated, when in fact it will only get worse. Because, one final point, people say that inflation is not going up, but inflation is already higher than normal, which is why the Federal Reserve doesn't want to cut interest rates as Trump wants it to do. But at the same time, Goldman Sachs and other such outfits are basically saying, look, the effect of tariffs on inflation is going to take a few months, but then it will kick in. Because what happened is, after Trump was elected, and in the early days of his office, when he was just making noises about tariffs, a lot of people imported a lot of things in anticipation of the tariffs. So actually, America's trade deficit actually got worse in the first months of the Trump administration, which he's elected to correct. And so yeah, so people have stocked up and so on, but eventually this will kick in, and then Americans will realize that their prices are going to rise, and their lives are going to get a lot worse. And there has been no reindustrialization, no good jobs have come in, etc. So it's going to be a big mess. But what Trump wants to do for now is at least postpone that reckoning, which will come when people realize that there's a big mess.
Yes, it's what's that old saying? The difference between good sound policies and policies that sound good.
Oh, I like that. I hadn't heard that before.
And but that's what we got under Biden. That's what we get under this. We get policies that sound good, and all they do is continue to kick the can down the road. I wanted to ask you this: there's been a lot of discussion about the Trump sphere, the people, the economic philosophy around Trump of weakening the dollar, of believing that a weaker dollar is good for, and they're getting their way because the dollar is weakening. Your thoughts on a weakened dollar and the effects we can expect?
So, as far as financial and monetary policy is concerned, I see only one kind of rational kernel of Trump's strategy, and that rational is rational from his point of view. It is
Right.
completely bad from the point of view of the American economy and ordinary American workers. But the rational kernel of his policy vis-a-vis money and finance is that he wants the financial sector to be further deregulated, particularly to accept crypto and stable coins, etc. And the reason he's doing that is simply because this is essentially, on the one hand, now the capacity of financial and monetary authorities to regulate everything, regulate all matters financial and monetary is going up. Today, if we move to we already have very substantially moved to a monetary system, which is all digital. We use credit cards. I mean, how many of us even carry cash these days? So we use credit cards and so on. So that and of course, in some countries, particularly China, they wish to have central bank digital currency. So, and that would basically mean that all transactions, and by the way, in China, I have to say, I was recently in China, and even last year when I was there, but it was worse this time. I feel like a dinosaur because I don't have their Alipay or WeChat Pay system and so on. So I'm like handing out cash. At best, I have a bank card to pay with. But, and everybody else is just paying with their phones, like, click and it's gone. And 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 it's so quick. But anyway, so the point is that in China, they have gone much further because you see, China has a very different system where you do not have powerful private interests controlling finance. The move towards central bank digital currencies, which can be very efficient in many ways, and by the way, it can massively increase the capacity of our governments to plan our economies, to direct money where it needs to go, to direct it away from where it should not go, etc., including for investment and so on. It would have a used correctly, used by a government that is accountable to the people, would have an astonishingly benign effect. But this is being opposed by all the private interests, all the private banks that are essentially today being licensed to produce money by the Federal Reserve. They are up in arms. They don't want this. And so they would rather, if you're going to have this kind of digital currency, you'd rather have crypto, which of course means that you, within the world of digital currencies, you create a world in which the Federal Reserve does not have access to who owns what. And so you can recreate. I mean, crypto is already well known to be a channel through which all sorts of criminal money is being routed. And so this will increase that. So that is the rational kernel. For the rest, I mean, Trump is completely irrational. On the one hand, of course, because he has promised the people that he's going to close the trade deficit. He talks about a weaker dollar. On the other hand, of course, he wants to sound like, America is number one, and a part of America being number one should be that the dollar should remain the world's currency. So he says the dollar should be strong and acceptable everywhere and so on. Of course, so all of that is completely self-contradictory. The only effect of all of this will be to further weaken the dollar. The dollar is already going down for a number of reasons. The size, first of all, ever since the financial crisis, the money that needs to keep coming in to buoy up the dollar is not coming in. It's not coming into the same extent. It's never recovered to its 2008 levels. So, and today even more is needed, but less is coming in. So that's one thing. Secondly, there is the American government debt. American government debt is only being expanded. Trump's big, beautiful bill is further expanding it by giving big tax cuts for which there are no corresponding cuts to public spending, which you can't have because, after all, Trump has now acquired a working class base, and even he has to think twice before cutting certain kinds of social spending. And of course, Elon Musk got mad on this point and left, and now has created his America Party and whatnot. And then finally, of course, there is this whole issue of the Federal Reserve and Trump. Trump doesn't like Jay Powell because Jay Powell says, I have to counter inflation, and so may not be able to cut interest rates, etc. We'll see what happens on that score. But none of this looks good for the dollar, and therefore the dollar's days, they were numbered anyway. But now that day of reckoning is being accelerated. America's travel to that date of reckoning is being accelerated.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, okay, so Trump goes, and I've got 50 days for the Russians to, do something that we know they're not going to do. And in reality, I'll put it a different way. It is a refusal to recognize Russia's legitimate right to have security concerns about their both physical border and strategic border. That's the way I would put it, right? They have legitimate concerns about their strategic border. And rather than recognize that and have a conversation about NATO enlargement, we got to pretend like we just want a deal, like it's one of these fake deals where we say everything's great in it. Okay. So Trump now says 10 days. If the Russians don't, and I've argued he's not responding to the Russians, he's responding to the Lindsey Grahams. He's responding to the pressure, internal pressure. 10 days. Now, here is, let me find this article, if I can find it. Okay. U.S. State Department presumes White House is ready for Russia sanctions blowback. And by Russia sanctions blowback, they mean the immediate destruction of the U.S. economy. The State Department said on Tuesday it presumes, I love that in an actual news article, that the White House is factoring in the potential economic fallout, that would be us, as it considers imposing secondary sanctions on countries purchasing Russian energy. Okay, here's the thing. And they say, I would presume, isn't it interesting, where we're talking about policies of this magnitude, and the State Department says, we presume, as we should, that all of the impact would be considered. And I look at it and I'm saying, they're saying something without saying it here. They're trying to imply something. Basically that, well, the economy is going to be wiped out, destroyed. But there's something I want to throw at you. There's a contradiction. There's something here that doesn't match. I am negotiating with China to get a deal right now that I have to get because otherwise everything falls apart here. 10 days from now, I'm going to go back to the 100% tariffs on China, which will blow the deal that I already have with them that's allowing me to kind of make it. And it will blow the deal that I'm trying to get with them. Something doesn't match here. It doesn't make sense. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so you are exactly right. When you were sort of leading up to this, I was saying, I'm going to begin by saying it's about China. And you already got there. Like, it is primarily about China, because which is the country from which, if the United States, if the Trump administration actually impose secondary sanctions on countries that are buying, say, Russian oil or Russian goods of any kind, one of the biggest countries to be affected, and one of the biggest countries which will be outraged and which will retaliate, is China. Russia, of course, but Russia, the thing is that the level of trade with Russia has already sunk so low. It's still there, but it is sunk quite low. I think this is going to be a big problem, and I don't care how many preparations the Trump administration makes, they are not going to be prepared for it. There is no way that they can prepare for it. China still supplies a whole lot of important goods, both high technology and low technology, both investment goods and wage goods. So in this, the United States is going to be, if such an eventuality comes to pass, then American people in the United States are going to suffer an enormous amount. I personally wager it's not going to come to pass. I think that, again, let's go back to, Trump always chickens out. I think what's happening is, as you know, and I don't know exactly what the timelines are, and maybe you do, but let me just say that, as you know, just today, the negotiations that were taking place between the United States and China in Stockholm have, at least for now, this phase is over. Howard Lutnick and his team are coming back, and it seems as though they have agreed to a truce. So the 1st August deadline or the 12th August deadline, whatever the deadline was, will be further postponed, at least in the case of China. And Lutnick is, keeping things, as you know, in the Trump administration, we are all supposed to be biting our teeth till the very end. So, Trump will only say something maybe later today, or, whether there has been a postponement or not. Because after all, Trump is the big guy. And who is Howard Lutnick to speak for him? So Howard Lutnick is saying we will only know if this pause has been agreed if Trump says so, fine. But I think probably Trump will postpone it because he can't afford. Right now, there has been no deal. He cannot afford no deal with China. China also has, the threat of not exporting rare earths and other such related things to the United States. So China is holding a big stick, basically. China is making very nice, but China does hold a very big stick. And the thing with Russia is coming in because the thing is, if he's going, like he wants to bring it forward so that he can deal with this uncertainty well before any kind of deal has to be made with China. Now, what is the Russian thing? I mean, what is the situation between the United States and Russia? As you rightly pointed out, Russia is not going to capitulate and not going to come to any ceasefire deal. The funny thing is that the Americans keep talking about a ceasefire. The Russians are saying there can be no ceasefire unless there's a comprehensive deal that takes into account the security interests about which we have been talking to you since the fall of 2021. Remember, there was that flurry of diplomatic activity. The Russians even presented the United States with 2 or 3 different drafts of a potential deal they could sign. They presented one, then the Americans said something, then they went back, did their homework, they presented another one. Instead of negotiating, the United States simply repudiated it, meanwhile egging the Ukrainians on to conduct their civil war even more brutally, bomb Donbass even more, and so on, which is why you got the special military operation. And even since that time, I mean, since Istanbul in March or April 2022 till today, I mean, every time the Russians are asked, what do you want? They have said the same thing. And why should they say anything different? They are very serious about what they are doing. So they're not going to capitulate. And as far as economics is concerned, they are fine. They have built a very resilient economy. They also have created good relations with China and many other countries, but especially China. So they are not going to move. And I think what will happen if the United States insists that Russia should agree to a ceasefire, I think that will simply bring China and Russia closer together. Another point very important about this matter is that essentially what's going to happen in the near. I think Trump is going to have to eat humble pie vis-a-vis China. Because the thing is, Ursula von der Leyen and the Japanese, for that matter, they don't mind appearing like vassals. They're happy to appear like vassals if they can pull a fast one on Trump. China is not even willing to do that. So China is not going to allow Trump to look like a winner. I don't think. If they do, there must be some consideration that I haven't thought of, but at the moment. But from what I'm looking at it right now, they're not going to do that. So really, so to come back to this point, this pulling forward of the deadline is simply to try to deal with this issue before that. But what that also shows you is that that Trump's negotiations with China are a pretty big deal, and they're trying to clear all the ground. They've allegedly done deals with Japan and the EU, and now they want to finish dealing with Russia. So yeah, I mean, I mean, that's another thing we can talk about another time. But this whole thing about that Trump has about him being a great deal maker and a big peacemaker is complete fantasy of Trump's imagination. He
You
has no
know,
idea how to do that.
no, absolutely not. Well, again, it's just a construct. He's going to construct this concept of him and convince people of it, and they'll all say, okay, it's a character that he's created for this TV show of, for this reality show of Trump. I also think this, that I think the neocons think they've got Trump painted in a corner with this 10-day thing. They're like, okay, I think that's what it's about. They're like, okay, they probably said, you got to release, and they're like, okay, we got to paint it in a corner in 10 days. And there's, Lindsey Graham, who I think is out there pumping this thing up. Oh yeah, Putin better be ready. We're going to get him, and selling wolf tickets. Oh yeah, we're going to give it's all over for Putin. Trump is on our side now, and we're going to go after him. I will say this: you can't Trump paint. They don't understand. You can't paint Trump into a corner. Because Donald Trump literally, this is when I really knew it. When Donald Trump said Zelensky is a dictator, and like 4 days later they said, well, you said Zelensky is a dictator. And Trump said, did I say that? I don't remember that. I don't know. I have no idea. And I'm like, you can't Trump paint that guy into a corner. Because even if he says something, 5 minutes later, you can have videotape of him saying it. Hey, you promised you're going to take out Putin in 10 days. 10 days? I don't remember anything about 10 days. That's silly. Putin and I are the best of friends. Love the guy. We're going to probably have dinner. I'm ready to meet with him. What he said means nothing. It's completely irrelevant. You're right. It's not that he's going to eat humble pie. He's just going to gaslight and pretend like, no, I 10 days, you missed a zero. I'm in 100 days. I doubled it from 50 to 100 days. So I don't know how that happened, but let's move on. I'm going to get a great, wonderful deal, the biggest deal ever. Trump's going to do that. Let me ask you this.
Probably. Yeah. Remember, though, actually, that reminds me, he was like that even in this first administration. Remember the time when he and Kim Jong-un were one day calling each other Rocket Man and Dotard, and then a week later they were writing love letters to one another. So it's all, yeah, you're absolutely right. He's slippery like an eel, basically. So yeah.
Now, okay, let's go to the next country that I think is important and different. So there's another article at the same time Trump's talking about 100% tariffs on India, a very important trade partner. Now he says Trump warns of 25% tariffs on imports from India. He says if the two countries are able to reach a trade agreement, India has been a good friend, but India has charged basically more tariffs than almost any other country over the year. Every time he talks about another country, that's the country that has charged more tariffs than any other country. The country that he's currently dealing with is the country that has charged more tariffs than anyone, that has abused us more than anyone, et cetera, et cetera. So according to the numbers, if we were to put them together and really believe them, 100% tariffs are coming on India in 10 days, and another 25%, 125% tariffs on India, on China. This is silly, but your thoughts on India. And got to add this. There are inklings. I don't know if it can happen. And I think that Russia's trying to bury the hatchet and bridge the gap between India and China. And it would be of great benefit to India, but I don't know if they can do it. Your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that India is a really a very different category of country. And its behavior is entirely governed by the fact that basically India is in the context of a fairly deep political crisis. The result of that is the election of Modi. Modi is a far right, anti-Muslim. I mean, look. We don't have to debate it. His own organization has taken inspiration from fascism. They have published textbooks that praise Hitler and Mussolini and what have you. So, I mean, I don't even have to go there. I mean, they are an extremely ugly bunch of people. Now, just right now, in the context of all this, nobody in India is discussing tariffs. Even, I mean, India does have a small trade surplus, but the fact of the matter is the Indian economy is still relatively inwardly oriented. Okay. Yes, the United States is the most important trading partner, although I think China has now become a more important one. So, you'd think that it would be in India's interest to make peace. If India, Russia, and China made peace with one another, they would be an unbeatable combination. But unfortunately, as we see, what's the big topic of debate in India right now? It's the debate. It's the discussion in Parliament of the recent war between India and Pakistan, in which the Indian government is putting out all sorts of false claims, which it provides no evidence. So it has said, for example, that the Indian security forces have killed the perpetrators of the terrorist attack back in April. They claim that they are not answering questions about the number of Indian jets that were downed, and so on. And essentially, all the answers that they are giving in Parliament, they claim, Trump claimed, of course, that he essentially negotiated the ceasefire, and the Modi government does not like that, because it does not want to be portrayed as a government that does the bidding of any other country. So in all of these ways, I mean, the thing is that that in India, these tariffs, which would be quite an important threat, are not even the most important subject of discussion. The most important subject of discussion is this completely incredible, that is to say unbelievable, evidence that the government is giving, or statements that the government is making in Parliament vis-a-vis what happened during the war. And we know what happened during that war. Basically, the arms supplied by China to Pakistan proved superior to the arms supplied by the West to India. And this is the most important reason why you got a ceasefire. But this is what the Indian government is trying to cover up. So you have really a level of dysfunction which is unbelievable. And none of, by the way, you should not believe the claims that are being made on behalf of the Indian economy. The Western countries and Western governments and Western commentators make these claims when it suits them. But the fact is that, because they want to say that, if China is our adversary, we will fight China with the help of India. But India is not capable of doing anything remotely of this sort. The Indian army is in a shambles. The Indian economy is in a shambles. It's not going to be able to deliver on any of these things. So, yeah, I mean, I think that Trump may or may not impose tariffs on India. I have no doubt. It really depends on the extent to which he gets to use India against Russia and China. And India is so dependent on cheap Russian oil that India is caught in the vice. The current Indian government would love to run into the arms of the American government, but it cannot, because the Americans have nothing to give India, whereas at least the Russians have this cheap oil to give to India. So.
Well, you were in the UK. I want to ask you this. It is my opinion. You're seeing it from ground zero, as it were. It appears to me that the UK is in an absolute shambles politically. Starmer, who's, I mean, just an absolute clown, but in his defense, Bojo, Liz Truss, Sunak, you know what I mean? I'm looking and I'm like, yeah, it's in a shambles, but I mean, you've been going from clown to clown. That is what the ruling elite have been vomiting up, these clowns. You've got mass poverty expanding. You've got threats. I mean, literally, they've got, a couple of dozen soldiers that, couldn't fight their way, probably couldn't defeat the police, the Moscow police department, much less the Russian army. And now Starmer's saying, we'll take on the Chinese. We'll take on the Chinese in the Taiwan Strait, right? There, meanwhile, I mean, I could go on and on. Censorship. If some poor old 79-year-old person says, I'm kind of against what's happening in Palestine, they grab and beat the daylights out of the person and drag them in and charge them with terrorism. Your thoughts about the state of affairs, shall we say, in the powerful world, that they seem to think that there's this still worldwide power of Britannia ruling the waves.
Yeah, I mean, there is obviously an element of that, of course. This idea that Britain is a great power. And of course, that there is a legacy element to it. Britain is still one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, even though if in terms of militarily, it's a midget. So not even as powerful as France, for example, and it is in deep economic doo-doo. I mean, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is a finance minister, they have these nice grand sounding names for perfectly ordinary functions, but anyway, there she is. She basically now faces, she had essentially gambled everything in her budget on getting growth, but there is not going to be any growth in Britain is among the most financialized countries in the world. The less you tax people, these people are not going to put money into productive investment. They're just going to put money into further financial speculation, further predatory lending, and so on. There is not going to be an iota of addition to growth. But still, Rachel Reeves refuses to tax the big corporations, is increasing taxation on the ordinary a small business person and of course workers, because she has essentially increased what are called national insurance contributions, which is essentially a tax on employment. Now, if you're going to create tax on employment, you're discouraging employment. And that means that the number of people who have decent jobs in the UK is going down. The number of people with even half decent jobs, they are losing hours of employment. So in all of these ways, ordinary people are hurting. Inflation is going up. And the government is still stuck to this old mantra that if you reduce taxes for the really rich, that they will somehow
trickle down, isn't that the word?
Yeah, they will somehow invest and create jobs. This is not happening. So meanwhile, what the really interesting development, of course, is that the existing two-party system is being attacked. Both parties are being attacked from the outer flanks. So the Nigel Farage's Reform Party, of course, is gaining ground, and the Conservative Party is essentially dirt. And meanwhile, Starmer has recently suffered the fact that Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana have together. Zara Sultana is one of the MPs who was expelled from the Labour Party because of her views on Palestine and so on. And so they have created a new party. Within the first 24 hours of them creating it, some 300,000 people had already signed up, and this number is only growing. This has already had an effect on the Starmer administration in the sense that, lame as it is, Starmer has come out with a statement which says that in September, he is going to recognize the Palestinian state. So clearly, these people are having an effect. So I would say that politics in Britain, I mean, you are absolutely right. Like these jokers that, that were elected one after another, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, and now Keir Starmer.
Theresa May. We can even go back to Theresa May.
Yeah, although I would say, I mean, she was at least a marginally better figure. In her own way. Obviously, she's a conservative. You and I are not likely to agree with her, but at least she took seriously the idea that her party's full name was the Conservative and Unionist Party, and did everything that she could to come up with a deal that would keep Northern Ireland. That could deal with the fact that, this whole the Irish thing, which, how do you have Brexit when the Northern Ireland shares and has an open border with the Republic of Ireland? Anyway, small little thing, but anyway, but yeah, I mean, obviously she's a conservative, extremely right-wing authoritarian, etc., etc. But anyway, but yeah, all of these people. Well, I mean, the establishment is scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of producing leadership. Starmer has clearly been made the leader of the Labour Party with considerable help from the establishment, which put through everything, including the kitchen sink, behind portraying Jeremy Corbyn as a dangerous radical who was supporting terrorists and so on and so forth, simply because he supports, every all around the world today, particularly in the West, if you support the Palestinian a cause, then you are essentially a terrorist, and this is what is done to discredit you. So they did the whole number on Jeremy Corbyn, and so anyway, all of this is simply a way of saying you're absolutely right about the declining level of political leadership, and that just shows the depth of the crisis. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, these people, and by the way, the same applies to most other Western countries. I mean, do you think Annalena Baerbock, or for that matter, Justin Trudeau, or even Mark Carney, is actually a leader with a vision for his or her country? I mean, it is not.
Macron and Merz. Merz is under
Or Merz,
20%. Macron is
indeed.
under 20%. And might I add, what's interesting is this: there is but one issue: Ukraine. That's it. What are we doing? What we need money for food? No, we've got to send more weapons to Ukraine, more money to Ukraine. It's apparently Starmer is the president of Ukraine. There is no concern. And Macron and Merz, what about the people? They need food. They need bread. That's not important now. We've got to get more weapons to Kiev. And I think that is going to have a long-term effect on foreign policy, in that the people are going to reject. You're going to get a completely non-interventionist backlash that I think is on the way, which I think to some extent is a good thing. Of course, there'll be the blaming of immigrants and stuff like that. But the other thing is they have become so, inured to the U.S. imperialism and the maintenance of U.S. hegemony that and I think people realize it, that they're just like, let's throw our countries in the trash because we've got to keep the U.S. empire hegemonic, when it isn't even really hegemonic. It probably never was.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, yeah, these leaders, they as I said, they are losing popularity for sure, because you see, if you remember, Annalena Baerbock even said at one point, and she said that if we are committed to helping Ukraine, and even if Germans don't want it, we will do it, right? So what kind of a democratic leader says that? If your own electorate does not want you to do something, what kind of a democratic leader are you to do it in the first place? But anyway, but it's not just a question of popularity. I genuinely think that these are not, in the past, no matter whether we agreed with their vision or not, but people became leaders, political leaders and leaders of their parties and their countries because they had some sort of vision about where they wanted to take the country. Today, what you have are people who will just put, finance minister or prime minister even as an item on their CV while they, so it's just one of the positions they will occupy in their life, so that as soon as they're finished being any kind of minister or prime minister or whatever, they will go to the private sector. They will have some big, juicy job where the fact that they have done this is simply an additional qualification for them to get lots more money. I mean, of course, most of these people don't do any work. It's just a question of how much money you can draw to yourself. And so this is the sort of people we are looking at. They are professionals in every way. They're not, it almost makes, the word politician is often used in a derogatory way, but actually it makes the word politician considerably better in my mind than the word professional.
I do want to ask, we got a couple more minutes left. I do want to ask you about this. The effect on the Trump administration policies and their philosophy on weakening the dollar and tariffs and all of that. How do you see the medium to long-term effect on the euro?
I would say that, I think that the euro, of course, it has recently, I've not been following it very closely, but I would say that the euro will strengthen in the medium term, especially vis-a-vis the dollar. But although there are on the one hand, I think vis-a-vis the dollar it may strengthen, but of course, given the Ukraine situation, I don't know exactly where it's going to go, so I'm not sure that I can comment on it particularly.
Yeah, well, yes, because the Ukraine situation depending on what happens. Dr. Desai, let me show everyone, make sure we didn't miss anything. I think we hit everything. There we go. Okay, let me show everyone your website. Now, Dr. Desai does a lot of good work, and she does a lot of interviews. You can go to radhikadesai.com. You see there's all about Dr. Desai and her latest works. You can visit her blog. And of course, look at these. Lots of books that she's either written or, there we go, more books here. Let's click on that. Look at that. Edited books, written books. So you can find out all about Dr. Desai's work, her articles, her op-eds. So go to radhikadesai.com to find out the what she's doing, her upcoming works, and of course you can follow her online, X, and things like that. I want to thank you very much, and hopefully, there's a lot going on now. One thing for sure, we've got to talk 10 days from now. I've got a feeling. I have a feeling. My prediction is, and I'm not even going to say Trump's going to back out. That would be too strong a term for Trump. He'll just redirect. He doesn't even back out. You know what I mean? It's like if somebody tries to block you, you can block a punch, you can do all kinds of things, or like certain techniques, you throw a punch in while you block, but Trump just kind of he slips a punch, shall we say, just kind of moves and lets it go by and pretends he never saw it. And I suspect 10 days from now, he won't even recall. 10 days? Did I say that? Well, this was an error, or he'll do something else before then. He just bought a little time. Well, Dr. Desai, thank you very much. Certainly appreciate it. Everyone, go to radhikadesai.com. Make sure you follow her on X and online. And the most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. Thank you very much. We're out.